Yeah,
Hey, while we
100%.
got this, we just talked about the Lions off season so far. Would you say they stayed status quo, got a little bit better, or got a little bit worse as we sit today?
Um, I think getting better is in some ways starts with getting healthier, which I think is what Braylon was alluding to right there. But I think so far, look, I was happy to see them keep Levi. I think it tells you probably something about the market was out there and the concern that people have about that back. The fact that he came back on a 1 year, $5.5 million deal, but you know what? Puts him on another contract season, gives him a chance and a need to come back and prove some things. And I think he even said it yesterday. Look, he came up with a ton of pressures, but not a ton of sacks. He's got to convert those now. And then, listen, the cornerback switch. DJ, I think, is a heck of a player. I mean,
Yeah.
some of the rankings had him, ESPN had him as the number one free agent that was out there. So we knew they weren't going to bring Carlton Davis back. This seemed like a little bit better, maybe fit number. I'll be honest, I was surprised that they went that big at corner. I didn't really see that, but it just gives you an indication of what their game plan is. And I don't look, the biggest question we all have, and inherent within your question, Maz, is is the defensive line better, worse, or the same? I think health makes it better, and I don't think they're done yet adding bodies and pieces to that through trades, through the free agents left out there, and through the draft. Because that to me is the major question. And that
Yeah,
and then what's the offensive line exactly going to look like going into next year?
sure. So it's not they're not going to go big in the free agent. We all know that. So do they bring back a guy that I loved? I
But they
loved
did go big. I
Zadarius
mean,
Smith.
DJ Reed was big.
Hey, Zadarius Smith
That was
is
a
big to me because he hasn't had a chance to play on the other side yet of Aiden Hutchinson. I think that's his spot as a number two guy.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, clearly they had a number on him that they didn't feel like they were comfortable with, and a savings that they felt more comfortable with by letting him go. Whether or not he's that guy or there's another veteran out there that might make some sense for them, we'll have to wait and see. And remember, there's going to be other guys that are going to be traded. The draft is coming up as well. So I do think that what you see right now is not what they're going to take to training camp because I still think they've got some concerns because Aleem's not going to be ready right off the bat.
Right.
Hutch should be ready to go. Davenport, look, I'd love to see him work out. I'd love to see him be able to stay healthy, but you can't count on that because he
No.
hasn't been able to do that. So I think there's more bodies coming, more competition coming, more numbers coming. And we're sitting here talking about something that they understand, and that's that they have to get better in those spots.
Yeah, 100%. Joined by Dan Miller, Fox, as well as the voice of the Detroit Lions. Look, you sat down with both coordinators. How similar will things be in terms of styles of play? This question comes from Ryan Ermanni, by the way.
Yeah, you know what jumped out to me, Braylon, when I sat down is that there's a familiarity between Dan Campbell and these guys that he's bringing in. Because, I mean, you know it as a player. We all know it maybe as employees or employers that when you hire somebody or you go to work for somebody, you may think you know who they are, but until you get in the trenches with them and go day to day with them, you really don't. And I think the thing that jumped out at me when he hired John Morton was that he'd been with him twice. He was here when they installed the offense in 2022, and he was a part of that process with Ben Johnson. So he understands how things work here. And basically what he said to me was, I'd be a fool to change these things. Now, there's things that they can do better, and if Ben Johnson had come back, there would have been things that they could do better. But I think it's going to look very similar to what they did last year. But I think there will be tweaks, and there's always going to be tweaks when you have somebody else in their rhythm calling the plays. So I think there's going to be a lot of continuity with the new coordinator hires. And I think the knowledge that Dan Campbell has of already working with these guys, I think is huge because it allows you a better chance of hitting the ground running.
Dan, a lot of the Detroit Lions so far in free agency have brought back a lot of their own players, the players that they feel have given them the success to get from where they were to 15-2 and NFC champs. Who do you think is the best signing for the Detroit Lions thus far? And it could be somebody that they brought back or somebody that they brought in. Who's the best signing thus far?
I think I would throw two at you. Look, I think Reed is obviously a really nice player. And if they had just let Carlton Davis go, then you would have been putting a lot on Ennis Rakestraw, where I think they got to look at him last year in practice. They got to look at him last year in camp. But, man, you didn't get the snaps in a game under high leverage situations to really understand who he is. This buys you some time to do that. Amik's got 1 year left on his contract. So now you buy a little bit of time to see who Ennis Rakestraw is. So I think getting that veteran corner, which, again, I didn't think they were going to go big on. I thought it was going to be somebody like a Darius Slay, Stephon Gilmore, somebody like that on a 1 year deal. They clearly went bigger than that. So I think that was big. And then again, as I said earlier, I'm really happy about getting Levi back because I had concerns. I didn't know what the number was going to be. Forget the contract for a second, but that he's trending up. This guy's got talent, man. He can move people up front, and he's still realizing that. And he's dealing with 3.5, 4 years of being on again, off again, not being able to find, the ability to play week after week until this past season. So I just think it's great to have him come back and see, no guarantees, but see if he can realize his potential here versus, as I said in a post the other day, it would have sucked if he'd have gone somewhere else and all of a sudden found himself and becomes that 8 to 10 sack guy who, frankly, he was in position to be last year with the number of pressures that he had. Yeah. So we'll see where it goes. So I like both of those. And again, I don't think they're done. I'd be surprised if there's not another veteran coming somewhere on the offensive line to kind of give them, some insurance behind Mahogany and insurance with Glasgow and in particular on the inside. I just don't think they're done yet. I think the one thing that gets me is I watch people kind of render final opinions on an off season and what they've done. It's that it's not final. I mean, we haven't even gotten through the second phase of free agency yet. There's still guys that are going to help people win games out there. There's an entire draft to go through. And then there are trades that are going to be made between now and the end of training camp as well. So I think, look, they've earned some equity with what they've done in turning this franchise around to the point where, look, you don't have to have blind faith in them, but you also understand they got a pretty good idea of what they're doing in terms of roster construction.
No doubt, Dan. And there's a few guys that aren't here anymore that I really loved. And Kevin Zeitler, I loved him. I thought he was the anchor on that on that offensive line. I thought Glasgow would be the guy out, not him. And then two defensive guys. I loved Ife Melifonwu. I loved his game. I loved what he did. He goes to Miami for $4 million, and then you lose the guy that a lot of people make fun of. Not me, though. Kindle Vildor. I loved him as a depth guy, a guy that could come in. I trusted him. What is your take on those three losses?
Well, I think Zeitler at $9 million might have been a little bit rich for them when they've got Mahogany on a first contract, as a fifth round draft pick that they can stick in there and save some money in that regard. And I do think at some point you're looking at Glasgow. I do think at some point you're worried that Frank's going to say, "Okay, I've had enough." So is that next wave coming into view with that offensive line as to what they're going to do? Like I said, I still think there's some veterans there. I just think, look, I love Zeitler. I love what he did. But at $9 million versus the idea of having somebody on a first contract, that's a huge contract savings there for them. Kindle, look, he played well last year. He did a nice job for them, and he's really good on special teams. But, again, you're going to put a number and a value on that and try to decide how you're going to, parse that thing out. Their depth, I think if given health with Rakestraw, he becomes now that first guy off the bench, depending upon if there's any competition in camp and he doesn't beat somebody out. But with Arnold and Reed on the outside, and we assume Amik on the inside, and then the two safeties set up and Rakestraw being your next corner, I think that's probably the guy. I think in terms of Iffy, look, last year was disappointing. The end of 23, he set himself up to be a playmaker with this football team, give him some really strong three safety looks. He's a guy that can come down in the box. He's got a lot of versatility, but he just didn't stay healthy. And then he was ready to come back, and he didn't stay healthy. And sometimes that's just luck. And it's bad luck, but there becomes a question of, how many of those guys are you comfortable with bringing back on injuries, guys that have not been. You did it with Davenport. How many of those guys are you comfortable bringing back again? And I think that's just really what it came down to. Iffy is a nice football player,
Yeah, he is.
but he's got to be available. And that's the issue with him. And apparently, I don't know what they offered, if they offered anything, or if they were anywhere close to what Miami gave him at $4 million. And maybe he goes down there and can maximize his potential. But the first thing he has to do for Miami is stay on the field. And that was really rough this past season when I think they counted on him playing a big role.
Talking to the great Dan Miller, and I'm glad. I think so often than not, I'm newly invested into the Detroit Lions. I think from watching from afar, I'm watching, okay, they get to the NFC Championship. Okay, they win the NFC North. Okay, they lose in the first round or second round for them, but first playoff game. And now I'm trying to play at home GM. Now I'm trying to say, well, they need to do this. Brad needs to do this. I appreciate you coming over here and just delivering some honest truth. Look at where they've gotten to. Look at the moves they made. Look at where they've gotten us. They told us it would take 3 years, and it did take 3 years, and then they got so maybe sometimes you need to relax and continue to let them make moves.
There was Braylon, there was a really good piece on Fox Sports website that went back the last 8-9 years that detailed the teams that spent the most in free agency. And then towards the end of each year, it would detail the teams that spent the second and third most. It was really, an interesting look at the teams that won March and what did they win in September, October, November, December, and January the following year, or even a couple years after that. And with a number of them, there was a little bit of a bump that first year, but it wasn't sustainable. And I just think in the NFL, man, and I know people are excited about what Minnesota's doing and Chicago's doing. Green Bay's really not doing much of anything. They're kind of doing what Detroit's been doing right now. But, man, when you know your guys and believe in what they can do and have done in your system, I just think there's a comfort level with coaches that you don't have when you're spending 70, 80 million bucks on a player that comes from having success in another system and you're trying to say he can have that same success in ours. And I would really just tell people, go read that article. It's a really good piece. And it doesn't really, slam anybody or anything like that. It's just kind of a look each year at what teams did and what the payoff was or wasn't. Because I will tell you, many times these teams that had the big spending sprees, 2 years later, they're shedding those contracts. Because they do come due. There is a point where you the salary cap. People say, "Oh, the salary cap isn't real. Oh, the salary cap you can just jimmy it and fit guys in." Well, there's a reason there were a lot of guys being cut for the last 3 weeks.
Yeah,
you know what? There's a reason that a lot of people that Maz is in love with that got cut by other teams got cut because their value and their play weren't matching up with the contract anymore. So, a guy like Jonathan Allen, the number that Minnesota gave him, does that match the Jonathan Allen that we've seen lately when he's been on the field? He doesn't look like the same guy he looked like a couple years ago. Maybe he jumps in there and has a great year. We'll have to wait and see. But I think sometimes when you look at some of the contracts that were handed out, man, it gives you a little bit of hesitation to wonder how those guys are going to do with those teams. And historically, to me, free agency is filling in little gaps here and there. And maybe it's filling in a little gap with a big guy, but it's not to build a team. It just doesn't work.
No, you're absolutely right about that. You see the moves that the Eagles have made. Eagles have to drop a lot of players. The 49ers had to drop a lot of players over the last year or so. So you're absolutely correct about
it's real. Salary cap's real. You might be able to mess with it for a while, but it's real.
It'll catch up to you, and the bill will come due, as they used to say, correct?
I just wanted to win a Super Bowl before the bill came due thing. That's all.
Listen, Maz, I'm with you, and that's kind of that's what they have to figure out. Is the best way to do that to be able to re-sign those two safeties, your running back, your tight end, all these guys that are coming up for new contracts, or is it to maybe have to cut one of those guys a year or two and you're bringing in player X at, $80 million? I mean, does Chicago love the fact that they signed Sweat for $98 million after they traded for him a couple years ago? You think they do?
No, they do not.
I don't know if they necessarily do that again.
You keep bringing up the other two teams in the division, so let's get there. The NFC North is the best division in football, and it seems it's only gotten better with the moves that the Chicago Bears have made. What of those three teams, and really it's the Bears and the Vikings because those are the ones that are making moves, which of those teams at the Lions' heels? Because the Lions, let's make no mistake about it, regardless of how you feel, they are the kings in the North, and they deserve that credit to believe that they would three-peat as of now.
Yeah, I mean, by a hair at the end of the season against Minnesota. I think, but the questions that I have, and look, they may answer these questions with flying colors, but the questions that we have in Minnesota is, okay, is J.J. McCarthy ready to take over a football team and lead it as a quarterback in the NFL on a week-to-week basis and win a division? They've done a nice job of surrounding him with some pieces. They've obviously tried to fill in some holes, and we will see how that works out. I mean, look, I give Minnesota credit. Last year, they went out, didn't spend massive money, but credit to them, came up with two guys, one on each side that had double-digit sacks. So, I mean, that to me is when you're doing it right. It's when some of these crazy money contracts go out there that I just feel like I've seen on instant replay in this league that it doesn't work out. Look, I think Minnesota's going to be really good again. There's no reason to believe they're not. And it comes down to the guy playing. You know, there are other things, obviously, health and that defense continuing to come together. But I think that defense was good last year. They've obviously added some pieces to it. But you're talking about J.J. McCarthy at the most important position, in my opinion, in all of sports, and that's quarterback. And how is he going to do? That's going to go a long way towards defining, what what Minnesota does this coming season. And the Bears, look, biggest question for them right off the bat is their head coach. I mean, Ben Johnson's never been a head coach before. How do you handle all the things going on around you? How does your staff work out that you've just put together? That, again, Ben made past that with flying colors. Then you get down to his quarterback. Is he ready to be the kind of guy that can lead a team to a division title? Green Bay's going to be good again. Green Bay's going to be healthier than they were last year. They're going to be good. They're going to be a factor. This division, you could make a case right now. I'd say certainly for Minnesota, Green Bay, and Detroit, that they're at the top. And Chicago, you could see a path, if things break right, that they're going to be there too. It's what you guys said. It's the best division in football. And I think if you're a fan of any of these teams right now, you're probably feeling pretty good because Chicago's full of themselves with all the signings that they've made and having a new head coach, and Minnesota with all their signings and getting guys back and feeling good about the situation they have there. And I know they're excited about J.J. McCarthy. But I feel like in terms of questions, the Detroit Lions have less questions than those teams do coming into next season. Not to say they can't answer them, not to say they won't answer them and do a great job and take off running. But I just think there's less questions here than there are with some of those others.
What if Aaron Rodgers signs with the Vikings?
Ooh.
Yeah, that's a good one. Listen, if I'm Rodgers, what makes sense to me is Pittsburgh. I really believe. I just think, and I think it's a good fit, as good a fit as you're going to get with a guy sitting out there as a free agent on both sides, because I think the culture there and the head coach there is so strong that they can kind of keep Rodgers in the box that maybe you need to keep him in, and that he doesn't become a distraction. Because I think he can still play a little bit. He's not the guy that he was several years ago, which one of us are. But I think, looking at him, to me, that just seems like a fit. It's the culture there, him moving in. They've added some weapons. They've got some nice pieces for him. If Minnesota wants to hold off on JJ for a year, maybe same thing with Kevin O'Connell. I mean, I think he's a terrific coach. I think he's a terrific offensive coach. I think he's a terrific – look, man, he was winning games or coming close to winning games with Nick Mullins and Josh – his name went right out of my head. The guy played for the Lions for a minute. Josh Dobbs. I mean, come on, man.
Yep.
I mean, you're coming close. Sam
Darnold,
he did win some games with Mullins. And it's so. And Darnold, that's a great point. Yeah, the most recent example. So, if Rodgers wants to go there and fit into what they have, him throwing to JJ, him throwing to Hawkinson, him throwing to Addison. I mean, I still think there's a little bit left in the tank with Rodgers. It's just a question of does he want it bad enough that he can kind of conform to whatever is happening there and not like we saw last year with the Jets, become some sort of story every Tuesday because he's going on and talking, and then that becomes a talking point. And more power to him. If he's got an opinion, he's certainly welcome to give that, but it can become a distraction when you go on, a TV show on Tuesday and say something that everybody wants to talk about Wednesday and Thursday. No team needs that.
I know,
especially
but the Vikings,
when you say it on purpose.
Yeah, the Vikings wouldn't sign him, Dan, unless they had all their I's dotted and their T's crossed. And he can't win a Super Bowl with Pittsburgh. They're not going to win. He can win a Super Bowl with Minnesota.
The culture there is so. Pittsburgh tends to make